kickstarting our first masterclass of the NICE-PCP chapter. And we're very excited about it. And thank you, all of you, for joining in so wholeheartedly. Let me quickly introduce our expert speaker for the day. We have Debleena Majumdar here with us. Debleena has been, very closely associated with NICE ever since our inception 4 years ago. So, in some sense, our champion for all our initiatives. We're very grateful. She has about 20 plus years of experience in strategy, investment banking. She's also a journalist. You could find a lot of her articles on finance newspapers. She's worked on impact ventures and across companies such as Fidelity, JP Morgan, Prudential, Unitas Ventures. She's a co-founder of Kahaniyah and Stotio, through which they help democratize growth narratives for high growth firms. So with respect to cultural enterprises, her strong forte comes in storytelling. How, as a cultural brand, one narrates their pitch and their story better across all stakeholders so that you know what the brand is all about. Okay, with that, I like to pause the introduction. Thank you very much, Debleena, and a very hearty welcome to all of you. All the members you see here are from our Punjab chapter. We launched it last month, Debleena. We had 45 enterprises who came in wholeheartedly. And I don't have to say that there is an inherent entrepreneurial DNA already there. So over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kanchana. And I think, like you mentioned, NICE has been very close to my heart from day one. And thank you, Raymond, and the team for inviting me. And thank you, everyone, for joining on a weekday evening. I know it's tough. So thank you. We'll keep it short and I'll try to keep it interesting and useful for all of you. So while, Kanchana introduced me a little bit more on the funny side, I grew up in Calcutta and I loved both numbers and stories. And we used to have power cuts at that time. Some of you may be younger than this, so you won't remember power cuts. But when we had power cuts, my father was the first original storyteller in my life. He used to tell me stories, in the balcony we had. And these were ghost stories. Some of them were like PG-13 versions of Sydney Sheldon stories. I understood later, of course. And so a lot of fun stories, right? And when the light came back, I almost reluctantly came back to the real world. So that was my first introduction to the magic of stories. At the same time, I love numbers. And therefore, I chose to work in finance and strategy, a lot of number-related work, investment banking, impact venture capital, etc. But a few years back, I think I realized that the most powerful narratives, right? Be it entrepreneurs like all of you, or be it business leaders, when they are convincing people, when they are trying to build something brilliant, it's actually by the bent of convincing people. And convincing people requires both storytelling and data. So that's what I've kind of specialized in last few years. And that's where Kahaniyah was born. And now we've built a product called Stotio to help people like you take it and democratize the entire art and science storytelling. And one big area of that is the investment deck or the pitch deck, right? So we're going to talk next 1 hour. And 1 hour is not enough for me because I love this and I keep doing this. I work with many entrepreneurs on this. But I'll try to just give a glimpse of how we look at it and some of the learnings we've had with examples, right? So today, think of it more like a trailer today, right? Like they say, picture abhi baki hai. So we'll start with that picture. And then, as we get opportunities, we'll interact more with all of you. I've called this the unwritten story.
Sorry, do you want people to ask you questions at the end or
Yes.
maybe? Yeah. Okay.
So ask me. As you go, you can ask me. This is not meant to be a session, like a one-way session, like Kanchana mentioned in the beginning. Though I can't see all of you, but obviously I can hear all of you. More you ask, I think the more useful it will be for everyone. So very happy. And I love doing workshops. I come from a family of teachers. So very happy. I think the more questions, the better it is for me. Right. So definitely do ask questions along the way.
Thanks.
Right. And I'll keep it short. I think I'll speak for maybe 30 minutes, right, with examples. But we can engage and we can discuss more. We don't need to park all the questions for last 15 minutes. I've called this the unwritten story, right? Now, why I've called it the unwritten story is my question for all of you that you can answer at the end, right? So that's a teaser for you. We'll come back to it at the end. But let me start with, some story from the past. I love history. I love writing on history as well. And this is something which I found very interesting from London in the 1840s. Are there any healthcare entrepreneurs here? I think all of you are working on cultural side, but I think healthcare may not be directly something you work on. But this is a healthcare example, right?
That's health and wellness. But
Okay.
they are mostly from the five sectors
Potentially.
that NICE and PCP work in.
Got it, got it. So this is from London, 1840s, and at that time, today we have recovered from a global pandemic, more or less. And this time, cholera was spreading a lot, and many people thought of it like almost like an epidemic situation. And there were a lot of theories floating around. People didn't know why it's spreading. A lot of people thought it's spreading from air. That was a common belief. And there was one doctor, Dr. Jon Snow. For those of you who have watched Game of Thrones, a real life Jon Snow before the fictional one came into being. And they were thinking, what is causing this cholera outbreak? And John Snow, the doctor, was treating patients. He had his own hypothesis, but people were not convinced initially. And he was trying to get people to understand. He was trying to persuade people, right? And this is what he did on the right hand side. If you see, he drew a map of London at that time. Physically, he drew out incidents of death from cholera, which is nothing but histograms. And I've mentioned over here, I've circled over here, one particular street on which there were large number of deaths. And then the question was, what happened here? He went there with the city officials and they found that there was a septic water tank that was causing the outbreak. Now, this small story gives us two, three insights, right? The first, of course, is that you can tell a story in many different ways. Yes, words are important. Images, pictures, data are also very key ingredients. And especially as entrepreneurs, those are arsenals we have. So the more we use that, the more credibility comes in our narrative. The other very important thing is more on the strategy side, right? And I do a lot of work in that with entrepreneurs. That in this particular case, while John Snow was a doctor, therefore he was looking at the medical treatment aspect of cholera. But cholera was not going to be eradicated by just John Snow's work. It had many other solutions required, right? Sanitation was also a key solution, right? And that's exactly what we see in our work, right? What we call our PMF, what we call our solution, our customer early product market fit, that keeps moving, that keeps shifting as we do more and more work on our different solutions. And especially, I think, in the world of cultural entrepreneurship, this is even more important because the problems you're tackling are like not just decades old, maybe they are ancient, right? And you're bringing back Indian tradition, you're bringing back Indian values to solve those problems in different sectors. So, therefore, all the more, this I feel is very relevant in how we look at things. My hypothesis, just like Jon Snow had a hypothesis, I have a hypothesis. Any question?
No, I think somebody had accidentally unmuted.
Yeah.
I muted.
So unmute for question and mute for no question. I think that's the policy we can follow for the next 40 minutes so everybody else can then hear. So my hypothesis, just like Jon Snow had a hypothesis, I also have a hypothesis. This based on my work for the last many years on storytelling and strategy and data with entrepreneurs like yourself. It's very simple. The story is not the pitch. And that's why we called it storifying your pitch. So what happens, the minute you set up a company, and all of you have seen that, people will ask you to make a pitch about the company. Your co-founders, your investors, your partners, your market will demand a pitch or a story or a narrative, right? If you go to many different places on Google, be it Canva or be it, LinkedIn, you will find templates available. And these templates will speak about the same 10 things, right? The problem, the solution, the market size, the traction, the competition, why are you solving this problem, your personal connection, and then what are your future projections, etc. It's the same 10 things. But even if you use those 10 things and create a beautiful looking slide, many times people are not convinced, right? And it is even harder to convince in the areas all of us are working on, especially all of you are working on. We're talking about cultural entrepreneurship, where the term itself, we're trying to raise awareness around. This is not a 10-minute delivery, right? Which people can see and they can use, right? There's a lot more education aspect over here. And therefore, my submission is that your story is not your pitch. You have to really show people your story. And through that, you have to explain the numbers and both have to connect. So today's session, I will focus on tell you a few things which can really help you storyfy your pitch. I'm not going to every slide of the pitch because that will take much more time. But at the end, I'll give you a little bit of sneak peek of how that can also be done. But we'll start more with how to storyfy your pitch. Now, to storyfy your pitch, the first and the most important lesson we'll come to. But let me just summarize what I've said so far. Storytelling for me is not just an art. It's not that few of us have the capability to do it and everybody else can't. It's actually not even a science where it's a rule book and everybody follows, they get the same answer. It's a craft. So more we practice, the better it becomes. And that rule book has multiple things. It's got data, it's got emotion, it's got, drama, all of it together, which actually makes a beautiful kind of element. And my initial learning on storytelling is that if you use it well as entrepreneurs, what happens is what you say becomes memorable. You might forget everything about the session today. You might just remember the cholera map. And somewhere you might be able to use something like that to convince somebody. It also makes it more personal, right? The best told stories are also personal. Each of you also have a very strong passion led reason for doing what you're doing. Some of it could be generational, some of it could be opportunity led, but there is also personal connection. And early investors, early believers, they look for that personal connection, right? And of course, inspiring action. This for me is the bottom line. Anytime we are sharing a story or a narrative or a pitch, we finally want action, right? How can that action be made easier? By sharing the principles of storytelling. That's the bottom line. So I learned from a lot of different sources. My background, as you all know, was in math and science. So this was also not natural to me. Initially, I thought I can't do it. But when I read and I read and I read, I researched a lot about how it happens and how it works. I always love writing. That helped me kind of get an early, understanding of what was it that people were talking about in this discipline. And I found this particular aspect, which Aristotle had talked about many, many years back, very wise man. And he mentioned that when you're trying to persuade somebody to take action, right? So you're trying to persuade somebody to take action, three things have to happen. A, it has to have emotional appeal, which is what is pathos. B, it has to have logic or logos. And C, it has to have credibility or ethos. So ethos, pathos, and logos, all three, when it happens together, only then you can persuade people. Now I'll bring this in your context. In the world of cultural entrepreneurship, a lot of people think pathos or emotional appeal is something you can lead with, right? The story of an artisan in rural Rajasthan and how they are, kind of making some beautiful craft, right? And therefore, what is that doing to save that generation of craft people is a beautiful story. But the issue is that today, in the social impact space, many, many people have been using that kind of story structure, right? And therefore, today, when you tell that story, sometimes always may not work. That brings us to the second level, which is a very, very important level. And that's where I do a lot of my work. Stories have structure. Many people don't realize this. They think it's all imagination, it's all magic, it's all beautiful words and images and colors, but it's not. It's based on structure. And the good news is there are only very few structures. Once you know the structures, and we have pre-built structures we have developed, having worked with many entrepreneurs, once you know the structures, you can identify what story lies within your structure or your story connects with structure. And that gives you a far better way of being able to convince the audience. I'll give you a little bit of sneak peek into this today, why structure matters so much and what can that do if you kind of use it in a proper way. Last but not the least, credibility or ethos, right? Now, ethos is where all the numbers you share in your presentation, your customer growth numbers, your traction numbers, your market size numbers, right? Your background, your team's background, all that comes in the credibility. So your 10 slides of the pitch deck is nothing but a combination of which slides help you bring the emotional appeal, which slides really can help you build the entire structure. You don't need to start always with the problem side. You can start from your story, right? And therefore build it up from there. So that all depends on who you are, the problem you're solving, and your audience. And finally, credibility is all the numbers. And in many cases, that is the story. The numbers are the story because in a difficult market, you might be doing something very specific and might be able to actually show very good numbers. So what we do when we work with entrepreneurs like yourself is try to identify where the advantage is. Every entrepreneur has some advantage he or she or they have come up with while you're working on your solution. Once you understand that, that becomes the hook for your story, right? The story hook is that, and the rest of it is putting it in a structure, bringing in emotional appeal and giving the credibility, right? That makes it much more different from a standard deck of 10 slides, which has the same flow, problem, solution, XYZ, right? So this is my hypothesis and my structure. And now I'll share with you just a few small examples or tips, you can call it, which breaks it down, right? So the first rule is that, and this is a very, very important rule, the story doesn't start with us. It actually starts with our audience and how they connect to the story. Let me give you an example. So at Unitas, I used to work with a lot of education entrepreneurs. I was heading their investment part for EdTech, right? And this is before EdTech really took off during the pandemic. In those days, it was very much an impact investment space, right? So when we were looking at pitches, right, from entrepreneurs, many people used to start their story saying that we want to transform the education sector, right? We want to transform the education sector. Now, when we were seeing hundreds of pitches, and the first response we had is, you can't really transform the education sector, and who needs a transformation? Now, when we ask the second question, who needs transformation, a very interesting set of answers would emerge. So think about it, a K-12 solution, which is really trying to help schools become smarter in the admission process. Imagine that's the company, right? It's not a social impact company in the pure sense of the term, but education at that time was considered completely social impact. Maybe they're working with smaller schools, or maybe they're working with budget private schools, and that's why it's impact. So this was a problem, a solution, but they were talking about it like transforming education sector. Now, where did it go wrong? Did the teachers want transformation? Probably no. They wanted easier workload, right? Did the parents want transformation? Probably no. They wanted kids to go to school, learn English and math at most, right? Did the students want transformation? Probably no. They want to finish schooling and get that job, right? Did the school leaders want transformation? Probably no. They wanted something which would help them get better admissions. And if they were really evolved, maybe leave a legacy. So this was the ecosystem they were selling to, but they were leading with transformation, and that story was not working. Transformation was more an internal need. If they did everything which they wanted to for 10 years, they would bring transformation, right? For X number of budget private schools, they would bring transformation. But that was an outcome, and that was not the thing they would lead with. So these are small things which kind of gets corrected when you start thinking from audience and not from you, right? So if I were to summarize this from the point of view of a story, think of it like the story of Red Riding Hood, right? So Red Riding Hood, a magical tale, right, of a young girl who goes to the forest to meet her grandmother. There's a wolf on the way, and then what happens? We've all heard this story. Just imagine, same story. I change the voice. I now tell it from the grandmother's point of view. What would I say? Beautiful morning. I wake up in the morning. My granddaughter will come to visit me. But there's a knock on the door. Is she here too early? Right? You know the wolf is there. She doesn't yet know the wolf is there. So the story remains the same. But what you emphasize and what you lead with and what is your hook will change depending on the voice of the story. Same story. Tell it from the wolf's voice now, right? The wolf is telling the story. What would the wolf say, right? I get up in the morning. It's a beautiful morning. I see smoke coming from the chimney of the old lady's house. What is she up to? Let me go pay her a visit. A menacing voice, right? Very, very different. So this a lot of entrepreneurs don't think about because we have done our work. We are so eager to share our work, rightly so, with our stakeholders. But if we just flip this a little bit and think about it, that who is our stakeholder and are they looking for transformation versus something more practical? Along with that, we can actually make the right communication of the hook of our story. And for different levels of the story, we can lead with different hooks. Story doesn't change, just what you emphasize that much. Where do you start? Where do you stop? Those things can actually change depending on the stakeholder you're talking to. So this is about audience, right? At any point, again, please stop me. I know we just have 30, 40 minutes, but this is why I'm saying what I'm saying. When a story is being told, when a narrative is being shared, when a pitch is being shared, this is what happens. You, the presenter, is telling it, and as
Debleena,
a
sorry, there
receiver,
is a question. I
yeah,
think Puneet
please go
has
ahead.
a question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, Debina, so I wanted to understand when you talk of, making the pitch, and especially for a industry and a project which is new, uh, is the, stakeholder as evolved as you to understand it that you make the pitch according to him, or do you make a pitch according to what you believe in and feel, and it could maybe be a product which is a little ahead of its time. Hence, you may not find stakeholders, but at least you believe in that project or the product and you drive it according to your own self.
So there is a way to make both, connect, Puneet, right? And I will share this with you in story structure. There are certain problems where the problem space itself is well understood, right? And
Yeah.
therefore, the way you communicate that will be a little bit different. There are certain problems which we are solving for, maybe you're solving for, where nobody even understands the need for such a problem, right? There you will communicate differently. So that's really what I was trying to say. And let me show you that in story structure. I have
Or
exactly what you said. I have a quick glimpse. We do a lot of in-depth work on this with pre-built story structures, but exactly what you said, I'll show you in a minute or two through two story structures, which I've got for you, right? But
Right. Thank you.
and these are the kind of questions which are very critical for us, right? You are solving a problem because you're passionate about it and you've seen the issue, closely. But the people at large are not yet either seeing it or they understand different levels of it, right? So persuasion and convincing is the key. And that's where, the framework of ethos, pathos, logos, and leading from that is very, very important. Emotion alone actually does not work. And I've seen this multiple times. A lot of entrepreneurs feel if I tell the story of the end customer who is really facing the problem and you see how emotional that story is, you will believe, right? But that story has been told many times. Unfortunately, maybe 5 years earlier it was still new, but it's no longer new, right? So therefore, the methods which I'm talking about is a combination of all these things. But very good question, Puneet, and I'll
Right.
answer exactly this through the framework I'll show shortly on the story structure.
Thanks.
So what we practiced so far is just a little bit around audience, telling your story while keeping your audience in mind, and what will you share, how much will you share also depends on who is receiving it and what is their understanding of your problem space, right? If not your solution space. So the other important thing, I've done a lot of work on this. If you especially have a product or an app, right? It's on behavioral science. Now, if I show you this picture, there's a gym at the top, and there are two ways to get there: an escalator and a staircase. And assume you want to go to the gym, right? There is no choice. Which one will you choose? Escalator or a staircase?
Should be the staircase, but I guess hopefully everyone will go by the escalator.
Huh. So I think, and this is very common, right? So assume that you're going for fitness, and both answers can come. You're going for fitness. The people who are going by staircase will say, anyway, I'm going for fitness. I start now. But people who are using escalator will say, anyway, I'm going for fitness. Why not start once I reach? So both are behaviors which you will see. And this is a very practical problem we will see with our solutions, right? How do we therefore make our solution or our product seem less labor intensive or seem less effort intensive, right? Because if it is very effort intensive, then our audience will not take the steps. They will be looking for the escalator, right? So this is a very small learning. Again, in behavioral science, it's all about small nudges which can make an outsized impact. A lot of work we have actually done is in identifying those kind of nudges for your products. What is a nudge for you in your problem space, in your solution space? What is a nudge? Because once you can identify that, and this is there in every area, right? In education, for example, we had done a product which was for out of school kids, right? And we had done a lot of audience research, etc. We found that these kids, and a lot of education apps talk about, X hours of learning, by topper, you can become the topper, etc. No, it doesn't require, right? These kids are out of school. They don't want to be toppers. They just want to finish the education. So therefore, we flipped it on its head. And, we almost made it like, these are the highlights of the match. This is the entire book. We have condensed into 20-minute modules. And if you know this, you will know enough to clear your exam. And that learning, that nudge is what helped a lot of people kind of get to it, right? Similarly, we were working with a very interesting, actually, artisan company, right? They were connecting rural artisans with global marketplaces, like Zara kind of people. And they were doing a lot of work to, and all of you probably know of this company. They were trying to kind of make it very seamless. They were trying to basically enable the orders. They had an entire order booking system, etc. Initially, when they started off, they told it from that end view of the end artisan and their story and how they are trying to actually build a better living through this. As they did it more and more, they realized that the global suppliers, what they're looking for, right? And what the investors in their case are looking for is the much bigger story, right? And the stories of two levels over here. One is the story of sustainability, right? Fashion is moving towards sustainability. And a lot of these artisans are working on sustainable materials, like bamboo, like cane, right? That became a very, very important story to highlight, right? And they would be buying for that because they would be not getting some of these access outside India. So the material became and we actually, I think, called it something like material story. The material itself became a very, very important part to highlight, which was not being done earlier. Second is for the, now think of it, this is from the investor point of view, right? But think of it from the artisan point of view. Why would the artisans come to a pace like this? They're anyway doing work locally. They're having challenges in getting regular income. But what would make them come to a thing like this? Now, when we actually did the surveys, we realized a very subliminal need, exactly like the staircase and escalator, which was this, that they were not worried only about predictable income. They were saying that this craft will die with me. My next generation will never get to know this craft because they're all leaving the place. They're going to the city. They are happy being Ola Uber driver and earning some income very quickly, but they don't want to put the hard work and sometimes manual intensive work to really become a skilled craftsman. It takes years to become a skilled craftsperson. They don't want to put in that effort because they're not seeing the higher income and predictable income. So, can you help me make sure that this becomes a legacy I can give to my kids? That was their unsaid need, right? And therefore, for the artisan, that narrative had to come out. So this is how where the nuances will differ. Finally, it's a place which could give the order booking, get the supplier, get the artisan, bring them all together. But the level at which they could communicate the story had all these triggers, and those were the hooks which actually could help them convince people, right? So now this is all about audience, right? Second, I want to talk about the structure, and this is where Puneet, I'll come back to your question again. The good news is structures are limited, just like seven notes of music. Even story structures are fairly limited. And when you see them, you will know now. Once you know the concept of story structures, you will know that certain stories will follow certain structures. The mistake happens is when people try to peg their story in a wrong structure. Because even your audience, the more seasoned audience, like investors and stakeholders who have seen many, many such pitches, donors, they would recognize the structure. So let me give you a very small example on this. There was a famous author called Kurt Vonnegut, and he had done research on what he called shape of a story, right? Now we've taken this and developed our own pre-built structures, but he had given certain shape of stories. He had graphed them out on X and Y axis, and then he talked about what is the arc of the story. So just two of them I picked for you to explain this concept, right, of story structure. X in his version was time in both cases. Y was the fortune line of the main character. Fortune line of the main character. And then he gave two structures, which I've picked out here. One called Man of the Whole and one called Creation Myth, right? Now let's take the example you mentioned, Puneet, right? Can you just share a little bit about what you do, the area, if you're comfortable?
You're asking me,
Yes.
Debleena?
Or any of you, Yeah.
So I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm basically a professional who's just with PCP on
Helping.
a, yeah.
Got it. No problem. I'll take fictional examples and you can apply to your context. So there are two structures here, Man of the Whole and Creation Myth. In Man of the Whole, the main character starts from the view of or point of happiness, right? Things are happy, things are fine, fortune is good. Then falls into trouble and then comes out of it. That's the arc in the first one. In the second one, main character starts with ill fortune, right? World is unhappy. Step by step comes out of it till they move to a world which is almost unimaginable. Now let me give you examples. Now, unemployment, right? Suppose as an entrepreneur, which starts off by saying, I am solving India's unemployment problem. And I will, through my startup, help people get out of unemployment. Will you believe that person? It is tough to believe, right? A, unemployment is an intergenerational problem, multi-generational problem. B, it's a humongous problem. C, it's a very complex problem. It's like, one of those very wicked problems, has multiple levels to it, right? How can
And
one entrepreneur, yeah,
it's not a single man's job also.
it's not a single man. So how can one entrepreneur claim to, but you would see these pitches, right? I'm here to solve India's unemployment crisis. Now, what this
Debleena,
structure,
there's one
yeah,
person who's written, the digital artist focused on Punjab, because you had asked the question, tell me a little about
got
your
it.
business. So, yeah.
Great. I will also use that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'll use that in the story structure. But let me finish the unemployment part. So, as you rightly said, it's too big a problem, too multi-generational, too wicked, too multi-layered or multi-headed, if you want to call it, for one person to solve it anyway. Instead of that, imagine if I look at what am I really doing, and this is something we had actually helped one of the companies do. They were actually helping rural women become micro entrepreneurs and create, small 5 to 10 local jobs. It could be in craft, it could be in art, it could be in tourism, it could be in, education, right? That is what they were working on. So instead of saying, I'm here to solve India's unemployment problem, then spend the first 5 minutes giving statistics on unemployment, which nobody will agree with, then trying to say, why are you solving the problem, right? The structure I would use in this case is directly say that, for X million rural women in the cities of ABC, wherever I'm doing the work, Micro entrepreneurship is turning women from job seekers to job creators. And while doing that, creating local 5 to 10 jobs each. So if we can support this movement, we will end up creating so many jobs, right? And while doing that, we are also skilling them in ABC areas, could be artisan, could be electrician, could be education, etc. And we are also increasing the skill capital of India. So isn't the second story something which will be more easy to understand as well as more believable? So that's what story structure does for you. It helps you identify the right structure of your story. On the other hand, if I'm talking about a creation myth story, right? In a creation myth story, it is what you said earlier, Puneet. You are ahead of the market. Market doesn't know there's a problem, right? Now I'll give you two examples. First, let me give you non-entrepreneurship, like historical examples, and then I'll give you an entrepreneurship example. So historical examples are this. Imagine Martin Luther King, the first speech about inequality and freedom, and Steve Jobs, first speech about introduction of iPhones. These two speeches are actually remarkably similar in their structure, in the story structure, right? And they follow this approach. They first talk about the world that is full of problems. In one case, full of inequality. In the second case, without smartphones. Then they paint a vision of the world that is so beautiful, so perfect. A world full of equality, a world full of smartphones, all iPhones, of course. And then they paint their picture. They are the visionary who have seen that world. And therefore, the message is, trust me, I can take you there, right? So you see how different the story structure is? You don't have to specifically focus on the problem because people don't yet know there's a problem. You have to really try to paint that imagination of the perfection world when the problem has already been solved. And then you have to show a picture of the world that it is right now, which really urgently needs that solution. Why does it need it urgently now? And then you have to say, okay, this is my credential or my work or whatever. I can take you there. So the what you highlight in the story and the hook in your story in that case will be very different. Now, the issue that happens is 90% stories today are actually man on the whole, and that's completely fine. But sometimes people try to present it as creation story, never been done before, first of its kind, one of its kind, right? Only time ever. And when we make statements like that, for people, it becomes a little bit difficult to believe. So now let's come back to the digital folk artist from Punjab, right?
Yeah, digital artist from Punjab.
So again, I don't know what you're doing with a digital artist, but I'll just create something and then you can further fine tune it, right? So if you're getting the digital artists from Punjab together and then you are helping them, scale or, drive a bigger problem, right? Or solve a bigger problem. If that's what your company is trying to do, it is a man in the whole
Debleena,
story.
I don't think that's what they're trying to do. Kamaljit, can you just throw more light on what you just said?
Yes,
Just so
hello
the
everybody.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So if you're
Yeah,
fine, Pranjit, we'll
I'm
take your example to kind of fit into the story structure. So that will be helpful for everyone.
yes, currently, what I'm doing is I'm focusing on typography from Punjab. Like I'm using lettering from uh, Punjabi.
Hmm. Okay.
And when I see artists from USA and everybody, they are using the typography as a statement. They are showing it as a like campaigns. There are big campaigns that marketing is using, and they're using their letters as a main attraction.
Hmm.
The focus point of their designs are letters. Nobody is
Hmm.
using that in Punjab. Nobody is focusing on letters from Punjabi.
So you're solving a design problem in India by taking the global trend in terms of letters, and then bringing
Mhm.
it back to Punjabi.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So this is interesting because what you're saying is, and maybe the people you're solving it for don't yet know that this is something they can do, right?
Yes, that's a big problem. Nobody knows
Yeah.
that it's a problem.
Yeah, exactly. So as you said it rightly, I think this is then creation story. If nobody knows the
Mhm.
problem, just by saying I have solved it, you will never get believers. You have to first paint the picture of why there's a problem, right? And the
Yes.
fact that solution can take you to that perfect world. That's what you have to show. So if I were you, Kanwaljit, the way I would start is, and you actually made a very good point, right? The design is moving to typography. So I would show
Mhm.
some very powerful designs, right?
Right.
Something like from IDEO, something from somewhere else, where design is, and I think you break that myth. You think design is a picture telling 1,000 words. No,
Mhm.
design can also be words. Design is all about typography. So start with some very bold, hard-hitting things like that, showing some of the best examples. And then you say, if this is being done globally, Punjab already has some beautiful letters and beautiful typefaces, right? Why are we losing this in our own culture? Imagine we could do this, and then you show maybe some solved examples, right? That this is what we can create with it. Imagine how different it will be. And you can end Kanwaljit with something which is around the AIification of the world around us, right? Of design. See that AI is self-learning, and it's self-learning on those global models right now. So everybody over some time will look for more uniqueness and more differentiation. So we have an advantage right now of going back to our roots, taking the global trend, but going back to our roots and making it more and more unique to actually solve different design problems for our clients.
Right.
Right. So
Thank
that's
you
how
so much.
probably so it will be very different from just saying, that I'm doing X and I'm doing Y and therefore Z is being done, right? Because that linear narrative will not work for you, Kamaljeet, in this situation, right?
Hanji.
So this is, I think, true for each one of you. The story you are building, the narrative you are building, the problem you're solving, it will fit into one or few of these structures. And there are some pre-built structures which we have. Once you can identify the structure, then you build your narrative based on that. What happens is your sharpening of the communication and what you can share in the first few minutes, which is all people listen to, unfortunately, becomes that much more sharper. If people are all the time, we would have told everything. You give me half an hour, I will tell you the A, B, C, and Z also. Unfortunately, people don't give us the time. So therefore, first few minutes, and we have actually timed it, first 3 minutes are critical. We are trying to convince somebody new about a journey which is new, which is entrepreneurship. So how do we sharply convey the hook? Require us to therefore really build on the right story structure, right? Now, one more deep dive on this could be when you are trying to think of your narrative, right? And obviously the slides you will build, think of it first as a story, right? A story has a character, right? So in your case, it's your audience segment, right? So it could be, for example, artisans who are only working on metal work, right? Or metal bidri work, right? It could be that is your main character. That's a big enough market to focus on. Now the conflict. Why is there an issue? This work has been typically extremely manual, and there has been nobody who has actually automated it, and therefore it cannot be done at scale, right? What is a treasure? Globally, there is demand for this kind of very unique bidri work, right? And what if, and I'm making this up by the way, right? It may not be true, so don't take me a technical value here. I'm just trying to show you the structure, how to use it. So the audience treasure, right? People globally might be looking for very unique designs, and they might be willing to pay a bigger price also if the design is very unique. So either you play a volume thing, bring in technology to automate the entire design, or you play a value thing by saying the design is so unique, it is handcrafted, it is sustainable, right? And you try to make it one of a kind. That is your narrative. You see how same narrative, based on the value, it can be told differently. Then why urgent now? If it is sustainability, then that becomes your urgency. The world needs this. If it's around scale and automation, then you can really peg it around how many people will actually get job through this and how you will kind of probably be solving maybe making a supply chain smoother, right? So it has to be based on tech, right? Your solution in that case. And then finally, result. How many people you're working with and who has this helped so far? Maybe bring in some actual stories. And therefore, you say this is how it connects back to the solution. So any problem you're working on, right? And this is the work we do. If you can get this part correct, the structure part correct, and the audience part, a little bit more deeper understanding, then, what people talk about, the pathos part or the beauty part of storytelling can actually be added at the end. But if we lead with and I think this is again something my pet peeve right now, because so many tools right now which can generate a video or a text or even generate, just uh, using prompts, what is happening is the structuring and the audience is sometimes taking a backseat. But until those are done fine, what happens is there'll be endless versions of the output. And I have seen entrepreneurs where every time somebody gives them feedback, they'll go and change it. And I think to some extent also this was referred to, right? That you cannot keep on changing your story because somebody who's listening to it is saying something different. It is your story. It is what you believe in. It is what you are passionate about. So very, very important, therefore, to get the audience and structure first correct. And then you can put the masala on the top, which is around beautiful design, beautiful communication, beautiful, and I'll share some methods with you, right? How do you make it more beautiful? But the raw power of the audience and story structure is also 70-80% good enough if you get that correct, right? The rest of it can be the icing on the cake. So this is something I want to leave with you. And again, like I said, we have pre-built structures which we try to help entrepreneurs align their stories with. And then if they try to add the additional part, it becomes that much more significantly beautiful. Now, one learning is we can't do this for a long time. Like I mentioned today, nobody will read War and Peace, right? They will want everything in 30 seconds, 60 seconds, one hashtag, one tagline, right? Everything has to be fast. Again, I go back to fiction. I'm an author. So authors, have done this so beautifully. It's called flash fiction. 6 to 10 words in which an entire story is written. So look at this, for example. Hemingway was considered the first author who did this. And he wrote this just for a lark. He wrote this. Somebody challenged him and he wrote this. For sale, baby shoes never worn. For sale, baby shoes never worn. Now, at the time he wrote it, this was a really sad story, right? The baby was never born. But I was just doing a session a few weeks back at a global e-commerce company. And there the interpretation was it's just return. They were not happy, very easy to return, therefore they return. So the meaning can change over time. But the point is see how beautifully 6 words can have a beginning, a middle, and the end and tell the entire story. Similarly, second one, epitaph, foolish humans never escaped Earth. Epitaph, foolish humans never escaped Earth. So you wonder, again, they played with a voice. Who's telling this? Is the alien actually conquering Earth and then also telling our story, right? The voice of the story goes back to what I said in the beginning. So the reason I'm sharing this now with all of you is that what you lead with, right? What is there on your slide 1 has a lot of power. And you can use this artificial constraint of 6 to 10 words and see can you give the headline of your narrative, right? Some companies do it extremely beautiful, right? Um, for example, Evernote, when they launched, they said, remember everything, right? Remember everything. Now, who is remembering everything? It's not Evernote remembering everything. It's their audience, the busy customer, the busy executive who has to remember multiple things. They are remembering everything, and Evernote is a way to remember everything. So, just 2 words through which they're trying to communicate the final benefit or the value they are giving for their chosen customer segment. So, that first page, what you put in about your company, you can use this 6 to 10 words artificial constraint. What will you keep and what will you not keep? And there's a trick I use over here and authors love to use this. It's called purple prose. So when you're writing a story, initially there is a lot of additional things which will come in. We'll use adjectives and we'll use extra words. We'll write long descriptions that are not needed. Second draft, it all gets cut out, and that is called purple prose. So the art of storytelling, as much is it a section of the science part of it, the logic part of it, the emotion part of it, the ethos part of it, the credibility part of it, on one side. On the other side, for me, it's also about what not to say. Very, very clearly, less is more in storytelling. So if you can show rather than tell, if you can make people experience rather than kind of keep telling them, the more beauty you will find in the storytelling, more applicants you will find of people who are believing what you're saying. And one method is this: less is more in terms of the amount of words which are used, right? So this is something I'll leave with you and see if you can use it to craft your first headline when you're starting your pitch or your story, right? It's very, very powerful. Everything which is extraneous, everything which is purple prose will go away, right? So transforming education will never make it because you're not even saying who are you doing it for. You're not saying the impact. You're not saying the benefit. So it'll never make it. Now, while you remember this one funny story, I'll say over here to make you just uh, make sure that you don't forget it, right? So there was a joke I read like this. Uh, so I think it was like Martin's Corner, fresh fish sold here, right? And somebody made a joke and told him, why do you need to say here? Anyway, you're going to sell it here, right? Then he removed here. Then somebody said, why fish? Anyway, you're selling fish. He removed fish. Then somebody said, why fresh? Because he will not sell stale. So finally, everything got removed and only shop remained, right? So be careful about that. It's not about removing everything. It's about removing what is irrelevant and keeping what is relevant, right? So this is about conciseness. The other thing which I do, and it's very, very useful for websites especially, It is called Flesh Kincaid Readability Score. So when you're writing something and you're saying something, so I say this, I use I utilized a multi-tune tool to process a starch resource. And I ask you this, what do you think I mean? I say this, I utilized a multi-tune tool to process a starch resource. What do you think I mean? Yeah, anybody can share, or should I share the answer?
Probably tuned by multiple people.
Okay, that is one interpretation. But here, basically, it means I used a fork to eat a potato, right? So I'm speaking English and I'm not Shashi Tharoor. It should not be so difficult to understand what I'm trying to say. But the issue is that when I use, words like this, which are not really common to our stakeholders, people listening to us, right? And every industry has that. We have some catchwords, we have some, probably very technical things which we are doing, especially if you're using tech in your product, like some of you probably are, then the person on the other side will find very hard to understand, very simple terms. And many people actually, investors or stakeholders who are very senior, not from our world, they will actually say it, simplify it for me, help me understand very simply what you're trying to do, right? So this, if you use this tool, it's called Flesh Kincaid Readability Score. If you go to Google and just type out this, you will actually get a place where you can type in your text or you can upload your text, right? In some products, like in us, we also have this automated, connected. So what it does is, suppose you are saying your speech, you're going to an event and you have to say something, you can just put up that text in this page. It'll give you a score, right? And any score which is less than, say, between 8 to 10 is considered decent. For a normal understanding of English, they will understand. Anything more than 10 becomes like this, too dense, right? So therefore all your passive words go out, all your non-action words go out, all your adjectives go out. So it becomes finally very, very simple, because that is really what people want to understand. This is right now only in English, unfortunately, not in Indian languages. But I'm sure with the amount of AI work we're seeing, that will also happen over some time, right? But the exercise is, make it simple, right? Because the more simple you make it, the chance of more people being able to understand it is going to be high, right? Now, last part, and this is really my favorite part, this is making storytelling into a habit. So it's not about just doing it one time. It's not about, making this one amazing document, but it's about doing it in small everyday habits, small everyday ways. And there are many ways we can do it. I'll show you 2, 3 ways today and we'll close with that. So if I show you this, what do you see first?
A tree.
A tree? Anything else?
Yeah, the first time around it's a tree, and then when you start looking at it, I mean, tree with a couple of birds, and then you look closer, and then you can see a lion or
Hmm, hmm,
lioness on one
hmm.
side and an ape on the other.
Correct, correct, exactly. There are also birds, then there are fishes, and there's water, right? If you look closely, you'll see all of this. The
Fishes.
idea is, yeah, fishes also. Idea is, it should not be so difficult to comprehend what we're saying. And design is a great way to simplify, right? It should not become so difficult. So when you're using design, if you now remember, first slide, what I'd done was I'd circled the piece, the place where there was a lot of deaths, I'd circled that in orange. Did you see that first?
Yes.
Automatically our eyes would go there, right? And this is again a behavioral principle. As human beings, automatically our eyes go to see things which are more bright and more shiny, right? Knowing that principle, the way we can use it in our decks or in our pitches, in our stories, is that highlight what you really want to point attention to. Maybe it's a number, X% increase in Y benefit. That number X is what you highlight. Everything else for you is at place at that time, purple prose, right? You can gray it out. You can move it to a non-highlight color. Just that X%, you can make it a highlight color. If you're using a graph, right, like you're using a pie chart, You can, whatever you're trying to say through the pie chart, that section you can keep it in a bold color, in your company's color. Everything else you can gray it out, right? So what that does is it makes it easy for the person who's listening to it or seeing it to actually consume the right level of information, what you want them to consume. This is again basically behavioral science only. And in design, it's called pre-attentive attribute. You just help people to see what is really important for them to see. Everything else moves into background. So this is a principle, very, very easy to use. You don't need fancy designers. You can just highlight or you can put in background what you don't want to show, right? So this is something which is very practical. I'll give you 2, 3 more methods which are very, very useful. The first one is metaphor, right? Um, we were working with leaders and we actually did this. If I tell you a leader is a tea bag, tell me why. A leader is a tea bag, tell me why. Any thoughts why or how?
Can I take a jab?
Yeah, please.
So he pretty much soaks in everything,
Yes.
okay, and then still brings out the flavor in the tea the way the consumer wants it. So it's
Correct.
all the people, the audience, the customer, his team, everything. So he's kind of a sponge
Sponge,
to
yes.
soak everything in.
Great. Exactly. And the minute I share that, right, more ideas will come. Some people will say only works in hot water. Some people will say, tested, by different flavors. Some people will say, you say I had a great cup of tea. You never say I had a great cup of tea bag. So a tea bag also the shelf life, details of shelf life, right? So many ideas will come. So what a metaphor does is, especially when it's a difficult concept, right? Or it's a difficult situation, a metaphor helps people make their own meaning, right? So I don't tell you 10 rules of leadership. You make your own rules, right? That is the beauty of a metaphor, well-used metaphor. So I had done this, remember, again on leadership. We were talking about how bad leaders are more often seen around us and good leaders are rare. I've taken this children's poem called Yertle the Turtle. It's about um, turtle which wants to be higher than the moon and keeps piling up turtles going on top of them. And then one turtle at the bottom of the pile, which is very oppressed, falls down and burps, right? And the whole turtle pile falls down. It was an allegory on Hitler at that time, right? So when I shared this, and then we said, okay, have there been Yertle moments in our life? Have we seen? Have we been? And that became a metaphor for how not to have Yertle moments. It was easier to actually kind of have a rallying cry, or if you want to call it hashtag around that. So metaphors help bring people together, especially if you're working on difficult areas, right? Where you do not have too much of immediate support. Metaphors can help you simplify and make people make their own meaning out of what you're trying to do, which is very, very critical, especially in some of the difficult challenges we are solving. Second one, you often see in social impact, right? And in cultural entrepreneurship also, it can be done very, very beautifully. You bring the customer into your stories. There's somebody who's at the heart of what you're doing. The artisan, the musician, the singer, the painter. You're doing it for them and with them. Bring them front and center in your story. The only thing I would remind you there, and people make this mistake, it should not be like their story and you came in and their world changed. Then it will be more like a testimonial, and again, belief will be a problem. The way to do this, if you do this one, is that you start with their story. It's almost like a day in their life. You are nowhere there at that point. It is their story, their life, their problem, their issues, right? Then you talk about how many such people have these issues, right? Then you talk about why they need a solution. Then you talk about your solution. At the end, you say today they are here. So in a way, what you're doing is you're moving away the salesiness of your story and making it more of a story, right? That makes it more authentic, right? And the last one is again very interesting. When you're showing data, when you have numbers, how can you make it more intriguing and more surprising in the way you're presenting it? I'll give you a couple of examples. So suppose you are trying to say that, and I think we did this with one of the people, mental health. He was working on mental health. And basically, he had found data around the fact that many people are focusing on adult mental health after the point of view, after the point of time where we already have seen certain issues, right? Then we're going to counseling or to a doctor and we're trying to get treatment. But what you were saying is, what about go back to our childhood? We were all happy. In our childhood, many of us were actually happy. We didn't know about this concept of mental health. Why can't we teach some certain things at that point, which is not around sickness? It's around happiness and resilience, right? And those kind of learnings can actually stay with us, right? So you reverse the cycle. So the way he told the story and we had helped him do this is almost imagine a future world, a world in which everybody is happy and where you don't have so many people. And he had statistics on people dying, young people dying, not able to cope up, etc. Turn it on its head and don't talk about things that are very difficult for them. It's overwhelming to talk about mental health and, depression. It's very overwhelming for people. Start with when you're already happy. At that point, give some small tools which can keep taking that happiness forward, right? And maybe that's where, if you can do more and more of that, support me with that, I can take you to that world. That is the way he told the story, which is very, very powerful and also got him the support he needed. So this last part is more about style. Once you have your audience and you have your structure, style can elevate it and make it yours. It can make it your habit. It can make it your brand voice. It can make it very, very powerful. But even without that, the first two will still give you your story and the pitch. So I'm going to end here, right? There's obviously lots we can share, but I think in the interest of time, I'm going to stop here to just make sure we also keep the time. What we do at Stotio is that we work with entrepreneurs like you to actually develop the narratives. So if any of you are interested, you can share your email IDs with Raymond, with Kanchana, and I also invite you for the early access to the platform. So it can really be, instead of me telling you, you can do it yourself, right? You can get the output on your own, which will be a far more valuable kind of output I see. And again, any questions you have anytime now, later, I'm happy to answer. I love working with entrepreneurs because I think they are telling the best stories, building the best stories. And your world, the world of cultural entrepreneurship, I think is telling the story everybody needed. And I'll end with the last point. I love singing, and I won't sing now, don't worry, but I love singing. I've learned classical music all my life. And I just came back from the Sufi festival at Mehrangarh, right? And the soft power of cultural entrepreneurship, right, which I saw over there, Sufi music. And it's not just people in India, right? People were there from all over the world, right? And not just people like me who are mad about music, right? They had made it accessible by bringing in dance, bringing in other art forms. So there were people from Ghana, right? There were people from Armenia, there were people from, Italy, different kinds of music. They were all bringing it together, different instruments bringing it together, and the reach and the power. And the fort was lit up at night. Fort was a character in the story, right? A mega character in the story. And the soft power of that and the way people were just immersed in it, I think is tremendous. The value of what you are doing, and if you add the level of storytelling to it, I think it's humongous. It's immense. So that is my, kind of, I would say my dream for all of you and also my request, because you have the power, right? And I've seen this and come back from Rajasthan now. So very, 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 all the very best to all of you, and hope to see many of you do this. And if you need help, always there for the product, for questions, any of them.
Thanks, Debleena. That could not have been ended more aptly. I mean, nothing like Sufi music. I think there are any questions, we can take them. Anybody?
Would this PPT be shared with us?
No, this PPT actually would not be shared. It is part of our entire framework. But what we can do is, if you need access to the platform, we are actually launching it in April, then you can just give your email IDs and we'll ensure you get the access. So you can develop the whole thing, right up to the output.
Right.
Anybody else has a question? Otherwise, we'll close the session now. Well, Raymond, I don't think anybody else has a question. Maybe they'll come back later and we could pass it on. Shrishti?
Yeah. You have a
You
question?
had a question?
No. I just unmuted myself to say ki no question.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, I
Mohit
have a
says,
question.
great session. Thank you so much. Thanks, Mohit. Thanks for joining us.
Anna has a
Pleasure.
question.
Yeah. Hi.
Yeah.
So I would like to ask that we are currently trying to build a brand that does cultural exhibitions, basically, exhibition based on cultural brands. So how would we effectively convey like the unique cultural aspect to capture our audience's attention?
Yeah. So I think all the more, I think the example I mentioned, the Sufi one, is very relevant for you. So I think the way to do it, Anmolika, right? Or
Yeah, that's at Bulika.
yeah. So the way to do it is actually to build it almost like an experience, right? So people are not coming only for so there are people who will come for the culture, right? Who understand that culture and they'll come for that. And that will probably be a small segment of people. There are some people who will come for the story, right? That's a bigger audience. And there are some people who come for the entire experience. So again, I'll just break it down for you from what I've also seen and what I've kind of done. So the people from Ghana, right? They came in, they were singing in their language. We didn't understand the language. But you know what they did? They told a small story called Greed is Death. Right. So I'll take 2 minutes to explain this. If any of you want to leave, please do that. But I'll just explain and answer the question Anmolika had. So basically, they were telling a story of people who wanted to defeat death. And on the way, they actually found a box of gold coins. And then they turned against each other. Basically, they killed each other, right? And then death came. And they found death, but they actually were killed before death came. So this was a story, right? Very powerful, very available, I mean, probably applicable in every culture. They told that and then they sang, right? And the song was very soulful, tuneful, etc. We didn't get a sense of the words, but we didn't need to because we already knew the story. So I think the combination of story and then the culture, very culture which is very deep rooted, and along with that experience, the lighting was beautiful, right? And the entire experience, in sunset was a different experience, night was a different experience. So all those three elements, I think, together make it. So I would say, Anmolika, it's about creating that experience with storytelling is what would help you differentiate in this particular case. And to just sum up over here, just to sum up one point over here, first time when I went there, right, it happened 12 years back. They were only catering to people like me, very focused on only music, nothing else was there. Therefore, the reach was small. But as they kind of created the experience, I could now see that there is a lot more reach, a lot more people can actually access it. It's become more accessible, right? So we might be purists and say that, okay, the culture should be only done in this particular way. But the more we can build an experience, the more people can enjoy because you don't know what part they'll catch. And I'll tell you one last thing. One thing which I didn't like, and everybody later kind of agreed to that, is one person who was from France, but she was trying to appropriate some of the cultural elements from India and to do a take on Hindustani classical music, right? And that fell flat because neither was she bringing her culture, nor was she using our culture, which is already very beautiful in classical music. She was doing a different version of our, which was not classical at all, right? And not even tunefully. So, of course, painful for me because I've learned music, but many people didn't like it because the culture part was not authentic. So, last thing here on Monica is authenticity is very important. While you can say fusion and you can do multiple kind of amalgamations, but everybody coming in has to bring their authenticity. Only then you will actually have an experience which is truly remarkable and people can connect with.
Thank you so much.
Great. So thank you so much. So again, like I said, please let me know your email IDs if you want to access the product. We'll have it by April. We can share with everyone. And through that, you can directly get your first pitch or your first deck and you can use it.
Thank you, Debleena.